So, while I'll admit it's kind of weird having 2 straight videos on the channel talking about Sean Monahan of the Montreal Canadiens, this is a very interesting topic that bears repeating, I guess. Because when it comes to the way Monahan was traded from Calgary over to Montreal, we had ourselves some reminders as to Monahan's tenure with the Calgary Flames and how everything almost withered away at the expense of an offer sheet. This is the tweet I'm referring to that kind of got this whole conversation started. It was tweeted by JFresh the day Sean Monahan was traded. In honor of Sean Monahan's tenure with the Flames, let's all remember how, if the Colorado Avalanche hadn't matched the Calgary Flames 2013 offer sheet of Ryan O'Reilly, the Flames would not have only lost the pick they used to select Monahan, plus a third, but they also would have immediately lost O'Reilly on waivers. Now, this is a blast of the past, and it's kind of difficult to read at face value if you don't know the whole story, because there are a few pronouns in here that don't really make sense. Oh, which him are you referring to when you're talking about the player getting lost? One of the most insane things I can remember, JFresh says, O'Reilly was playing in the KHL, which meant he needed to pass the re-entry waivers to join a new team. The Flames and O'Reilly's agent were unaware of this. If I'm remembering correctly, the Columbus Blue Jackets would have had first dibs. Now, what in the world is JFresh talking about here? Ryan O'Reilly, Calgary Flames losing out on Monahan? What in the world does this mean? Let's go over the entire profile of Ryan O'Reilly before he had the Tim Hortons stuff, before he had the Buffalo stuff, and before he became a Stanley Cup champion, and go back to his days with the Colorado Avalanche. So, Ryan O'Reilly is 31 years old. He's been in the NHL for a while, drafted back in 2009 by Colorado in the second round. Back in this time frame, he wasn't seen as the top-of-the-line, captain material player that he is for the St. Louis Blues today. While I'll definitely acknowledge Ryan O'Reilly is one of the best two-way players in the NHL, he is under a point-per-game-ish most seasons. He is always a point-per-game caliber player in the postseason, and the guy went out there with a 77-point year before winning the Stanley Cup, not even as the captain of the Blues just yet, but back when he was drafted in 2009, he actually made the Colorado Avalanche the next season, getting 26 points in 81 games played. Give it 3 years and the guy eventually becomes a 55-point player at 20 years old and 81 games played, and he suits up for Team Canada at the World Juniors. It's at this point that he needs a contract extension, and a lot of people in Colorado are going out there saying, hey, what in the world is this guy going to get on the market? He's a pretty good player already, and he's only 21 years old, so what in the world are we going to offer this player? Eventually, the Calgary Flames swooped in there and hit the Colorado Avalanche with an offer sheet. Now, we haven't had too many offer sheets accepted in the NHL the past decade and a bit, but this was one of the only cases in which that happened. Ryan O'Reilly signed a 2-year, $5 million AAV offer sheet with the Calgary Flames, that in which the Colorado Avalanche had the opportunity to go out there and match or not. $5 million is a pretty steep contract for a guy in his early 20s, especially with the cap percentage of what the NHL was like back then. But he was coming off a season where he was fairly productive, and it was fair to assume that he would go out there and produce even more as the years went on. The compensation that the Colorado Avalanche would have received from the Calgary Flames had they not matched their O'Reilly offer sheet would have been a first-round pick, as well as a third. Now, the rest of the story is kind of boring because at the end of the day, the Colorado Avalanche did end up matching that $10 million 2-year contract. They gave him a $5 million AAV salary. They signed him to another 2-year deal worth $6 million AAV in 2014. He eventually became a pretty good player for Colorado, posting up 64 points in a career-high year with them. He got sent over to Buffalo, had multiple 60-point years, then got sent over to St. Louis, where he is the player that he is today. However, if you go back to that 2013 period wherein the Colorado Avalanche had that offer sheet in the first place, if you acknowledge what would have happened in that season had they not matched the contract, things would have been disastrous for the Calgary Flames. This is an article back from NHL.com on March 1st, 2013, talking about that same thing. When the Colorado Avalanche quickly matched Calgary's offer sheet to Ryan O'Reilly, they actually helped prevent a potentially costly situation for the Flames. Calgary signed the 22-year-old center to a 2-year, $10 million offer sheet Thursday afternoon, and by evening, the Avalanche had matched. As Chris Johnston of Rogers Sportsnet first reported Friday morning, had the Avalanche not matched, the Flames would have yielded first and third round picks in the 2013 draft, and O'Reilly would have had to be put on waivers. Now, before we get to that last part of the sentence, let's go over just the compensation first and foremost. The Calgary Flames, because the offer sheet was matched, kept their first and third in the 2013 draft. With that pick in the first round, they selected Sean Monahan 6th overall, which is kind of crazy because when you realize, hey, wait a minute, that was a 6th overall pick that the Colorado Avalanche probably would have been able to get had they not accepted that Ryan O'Reilly offer sheet. They had the 1st overall pick in that season as well, getting Nathan MacKinnon. There is a world where they could have had the likes of a Darnell Nurse or a Bo Horvat or heck, even just a Sean Monahan and a MacKinnon taken within 5 picks of each other. The Calgary Flames' 3rd round pick in that season, they selected Keegan Kanzig, who didn't really become anything at the NHL level, unfortunately. But the really interesting part about this entire sentence is the fact that if the Calgary Flames took on Ryan O'Reilly and they successfully got the player, O'Reilly would have probably had to be put on waivers. Because Ryan O'Reilly played 2 games for Metallurg Magnitogorsk of the KHL after the NHL season started, he would have been subject to the same provision that allowed the New York Islanders to claim Evgeny Nabokov after he signed a contract with the Red Wings during the 09-010 season. 09-010? 09-10 season. Prior to tendering the offer sheet for Ryan O'Reilly, we, as a hockey operations department, examined whether there were any impediments to our successful securing of the services of the player, including, but not limited to, his having played in the KHL after the start of the current NHL season, Calgary GM Jay Feaster said in a statement. What this pretty much means is what Jay Fresh said in his first tweet. O'Reilly was playing in the KHL, which meant he needed to pass through re-entry waivers to join a new team. The Flames and O'Reilly's agent were unaware of this. The assumption is, if Ryan O'Reilly signed with the Colorado Avalanche and he went back over to that team, because he was on Colorado beforehand, he would not have needed to go through waivers. But because he left the NHL, he played in the KHL, and then he signed with a new team in Calgary potentially, he would have had to go through that waiver wire process, and if I'm remembering right, the Blue Jackets would have had first dibs. Ryan O'Reilly could have been a Columbus Blue Jacket had the Colorado Avalanche just not accepted that Calgary Flames offer sheet. The Flames would not have just only lost their first-round pick, that in which they selected Sean Monahan with in 2013, but they also would have lost the guy that they got with that draft pick in the compensation for free. Ryan O'Reilly would have been put on waivers, forced on waivers. The team and his agent were unaware of this process, and the Flames could have really gotten screwed over. Like, the magnitude as to what that sort of transaction would have foreseen for the team, I think it's really difficult to try to envision, because Sean Monahan was a very good player for Calgary before, of course, all the injuries struck and took him out in the way that they did. But if you lost out on that guy, you lost out on Sean Monahan, and you got nobody in return because the player you would have gotten in return, O'Reilly, would have been lost for free to Columbus. Imagine the progression of Johnny Gaudreau. Imagine that 2014-15 season where these guys are rookies and they're going out there with Yuri Hudler and there's nobody else to play center on that line, and you have to force somebody like Backlund to go up on the top or whatever it is. I don't really know what the entire process would be like because you wouldn't have had anybody to replace him coming back. Meanwhile, Columbus probably would have taken Ryan O'Reilly for free at $5 million a season because the guy had 55 points the previous year as a 22-year-old player in the NHL. There certainly was a lot to look forward to when it came to the profile that O'Reilly had. 2012-2013 was a different time for the NHL, of course. I mean, it was 10 years ago, for crying out loud. But still, you take a look at the Columbus Blue Jackets and where they were in that time period. You had Vaclav Prospol as their top point guy. Derek Brassard was over there on that team. Like, dude, this was such a strange roster when you think about where they were 10 years ago and you say, hey, Ryan O'Reilly could have been on this team. He could have been the best player on that team right away. Mark Letestu, Fyodor Tutin, Brandon Dubinsky, Foligno, Johnson, like, that's a throwback, man. 10 years ago, Ryan O'Reilly could have been on this team and the Calgary Flames could have gotten screwed. It's just that the Colorado Avalanche decided, okay, we'll keep Ryan O'Reilly instead of taking that first round pick that eventually would have become 6th overall because, hey, they could have had MacKinnon and a guy like Monahan for something. I don't know. Talk in the comments, though, all your thoughts about this entire process over here. The idea that the Calgary Flames almost got screwed to heck and back with this Ryan O'Reilly offer sheet because of the KHL, because of the international hockey rules that the NHL has in place. I hope you enjoyed this video. Juraj rolls 99, and bye.